This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
A warning to our listeners, this episode contains references to suicide. Discretion is advised.
Okay, Ollie, it's my turn to tell a story. And it's one that you and I have been thinking about a lot lately.
Okay, I'm ready.
But to really set the scene, I'm going to need some music.
I got you.
And maybe throw in an old school film reel?
How's that?
Perfect. So our story starts back in the day. It's not long after World War II. An industry, at least in the US, is booming. The Olympics have started back up again. We're listening to Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra. And in the middle of it all, there's a man named J. Paul Getty. Getty's an oil man. He's an innovator. He's known for being smart and fast, and he's fabulously wealthy. But it still isn't enough. Getty wants more. And to do that, he'll need to take a big risk. Which means looking to a place considered, at least by those in the West, to be a barren wasteland. It's a stretch of desert on the Arabian Peninsula. We're talking about 2,000 square miles of hot, dry sand called the neutral zone.
Right, I know where this is. It was actually carved out by the British when they drew the borders of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait in 1922. Because colonialism, of course.
Of course.
At the time, oil production was concentrated a little bit further away in Iran.
J. Paul Getty's energies were focused on expanding his company to rival the oil giants. This meant breaking into the Middle East.
Technically, the neutral zone wasn't a part of any country. In fact, nomadic Arab tribes called the Bedouins lived there, but they did not control the oil rights for the land that they lived on.
So to broker a deal, Getty would have to talk to the sheiks, or the royal rulers of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait.
So that's what he did. And keep in mind, they hadn't found a drop of oil in the neutral zone yet. Getty was just betting that they would.
I think Mr. Getty's credo was to do things on his own. I don't think he ever looked to join with other people.
That's Dr. Paul Walton speaking in the 1995 documentary called The Gettys, A Tragedy of Riches. It's about J. Paul Getty's sprawling oil empire, and it features interviews with people close to him.
Walton was a young MIT-trained geologist, and Getty hired him to go to the neutral zone and find the oil.
We flew over about 500 feet off the ground. Right to the north of the neutral zone was this pretty little hill, all covered with oil wells, which was the largest field in the world at that time. And right out in the southwest part was another one. Looked just like it. And I thought, there's another field down here.
It was that hunch from the geologist that convinced Getty to place his bid. And the bid he made was higher than anything the industry had ever seen. Until this point, foreign oil companies weren't actually paying the sheiks all that much for oil rights. But Getty set a precedent for the sheiks to demand much more money going forward.
Well, that's great for the sheiks, but what about Getty? Did his big gamble pay off?
Well, Getty was playing a long game. It cost millions, and it took 5 years. But in 1953, they finally struck black gold in the very same place Walton had spotted from the plane. That area could produce up to 500,000 barrels a day. Getty not only became a billionaire, he became the richest man in the world. Getty flew there for a photo op with the Saudi king and the emir of Kuwait. He taught himself enough Arabic to talk business with them.
When the three richest men met in the desert, the sheikhs learned with surprise that, in more ways than one, Mr. Getty from Minneapolis could speak their language. He'd learned Arabic from gramophone records.
Getty's big gamble had paid off. He threw Walton a mere $1,200 bonus, and then he relished in the thrill of the discovery.
I think going over there and finding a major oil field in the Middle East, the mere finding of it was the satisfaction that he was looking for. I think money was secondary.
For years, Getty lived out of hotel rooms, addicted to doing deals.
The richest man in the world rules an empire alone.
The economy would never be the same, and neither would the planet. It's difficult to describe just how influential J. Paul Getty was. This man influenced everything, from finance to art to global warming. And today, Getty's legacy is, in part, being challenged by his own granddaughter, Aileen. She's funding people who want to end the oil business entirely. Aileen Getty is like her grandfather, kind of a maverick. And just like him, she's also super wealthy, someone who's lived a life most of us couldn't imagine. But the similarities end there.
In our first episode, we told you the story of a group of ordinary people who are risking a lot to get our attention. It turns out it's even deeper than that.
Because this is also a story about one of the richest men who ever lived, one who took a huge risk, and it paid off so spectacularly that his family, his money, and his name are still changing the world. Just maybe not in the way you'd expect. I'm Samantha Altman.
And I'm Alessandra Ram.
This is Sabotage from Good Luck Media. Episode 2, The Dynasty. So, over the last 8 months, as we've been reporting this wild story, Ollie and I have developed a little bit of a fixation with the Gettys.
I think we're getting obsessed. How would you say your level of obsession is?
Well, I was lying awake last night thinking about the Getty family at 1:30 in the morning. So
there is so much going on with them. Even wrapping your head around who's who in the family gets a little complex.
I know there were so many wives and sons and mistresses.
We needed to get a handle on this sprawling dynasty. So we reached out to someone who wrote a whole book about them. James Reginato seems a little obsessed with the Gettys too. He's covered them and ultra-wealthy people like them for years for magazines like Vanity Fair. And in 2022, he published a revealing biography of the family. It's called Growing Up Getty.
If you want me to give you kind of the basics of the family tree, J. Paul Getty had 5 wives with whom he had 5 sons. The 5 sons had 19 children, 16 of whom are still alive today. And those grandchildren now begat a generation of great-grandchildren, of which there are, I think, close to 50 today, but they're spread out.
That's a lot of Gettys. We needed a visual aid. So at Ollie's house on a rainy day, we sat on the living room floor and we cracked open Reginato's book.
Let's flip the pages. I'll let you count.
Okay. Jeanette.
Wife 1.
Hélène.
Wife 2.
Adolphine. Finney. That's 3.
Wife 3.
Anne Rourke.
4.
Teddy.
5. Okay.
So he must have had 5 sons. Let's go back. Not only did J. Paul have a lot of descendants, but many of them also have quite a reputation. Just their name, Getty, means different things to different people. Like, Sam, what do you think when you hear the name Getty?
A few things come to mind, but the first adjective is always super rich.
He earns more each day than the average man earns in a lifetime. His real wealth is incalculable. J. Paul Getty is unique. He's the only American dollar billionaire. Around the globe, the Getty oil wells gush. 80,000 barrels a day from the neutral zone of Arabia. More from Iran and Canada. In the United States, wherever oil's produced, there he is. Along the Pacific coast and in the Rocky Mountains. North Dakota and Wyoming.
You just heard clips from a BBC documentary called Solitary Billionaire, which, wow, has some truly remarkable transatlantic narration. In it, J. Paul Getty's eccentricities are on full display, as are his views on wealth and status.
That is an element of this story that is particularly interesting for me. Earlier in my career, I edited a whole beat focused on billionaire soft power, how the ultra-wealthy in America build and protect their wealth, and how they use it to wield enormous influence on everything. And J. Paul Getty is like the OG granddaddy billionaire to the ones you hear about a lot today, like Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, it's true. What he did for the oil industry makes him like the old school version of the tech billionaires, the ones who bet on the creation of the internet, Bitcoin, or AI.
Right. Some of them probably even look to Getty's playbook.
I'm curious because you've said this before. What have you seen in terms of some of these billionaires modeling things after Getty in particular?
I keep asking myself, how much were Bezos and Zuckerberg inspired by the example that Getty set 75 years before?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they were.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he wrote a whole book called what? What was the title of that again?
How to be rich.
Yeah, not just how to get rich.
How to be rich. It's an important distinction that he reminds you of constantly throughout the book.
And, you know, the other thing that's come to mind as I get deeper into the Getty story is how the moment that Jeff Bezos was named wealthiest person in the world, like he went from being kind of niche interest figure to being someone that absolutely everyone knew, because people get obsessed when you become the superlative of wealth. And Getty had the same experience where when they named him the wealthiest person in the world, it kind of changed everything and kicked off an obsession with him in the general public that I don't think really existed before.
But rich isn't the only word that comes to mind when people think of the Gettys.
You know, inevitably, tragedy is a word that people associate with that family.
That's right. Tragedy. The Gettys' dramas loom so large in the popular imagination that they've inspired films and TV series about the family. Some of his descendants have struggled very publicly with addiction, including Aileen. A few of them have died quite young. And of course, there's the kidnapping.
Mr. Getty, your grandson.
In the 2017 Oscar-nominated movie, All the Money in the World, you can see a fictionalized version of what is arguably the most dramatic episode in the Getty family saga. It was back in 1973. Getty's 16-year-old grandson, Paul, Eileen's older brother, was kidnapped in Rome by the Calabrian mafia and held for a $17 million ransom.
To release him.
I don't have any money.
Get it from your father-in-law. He has all the money in the world.
But Getty refused to pay. It was only after 5 months, and after the kidnappers mailed Paul's severed ear, that Getty finally coughed up a much lower $2.2 million.
Which, by the way, was tax deductible.
Yeah, and then Getty lent another $1 million with interest to Paul's dad to pay off the rest of the ransom. Getty's grandson was released, finally. But he struggled with drugs and alcohol in the years afterward, and he suffered an overdose and stroke less than a decade later that paralyzed and blinded him. You see, Getty was insanely rich, but he was also extremely frugal.
In that BBC documentary, Solitary Billionaire, the host sits down with Getty at Sutton Place, his sprawling English estate, and digs into his reputation.
There are a great many stories, Mr. Getty, of your care with money. For example, you've installed a pay telephone box here in Sutton Place to prevent your guests abusing your hospitality by making drunken toll calls.
In the documentary, you can see a huge sign announcing to guests, "You may telephone here." And the payphone is tucked away in a tiny white room.
But Getty has no shame. He smiles to himself a little in response.
Well, I think right-thinking guests would consider that was a benefit. It's rather daunting if you're visiting somewhere and you have to put in a long-distance call and charge your host with it.
Reminder, this man is a billionaire.
Just listen to the Duke of Bedford, one of Getty's longtime friends.
Paul charged his son when he came for lunch, £9 he used to have to pay for lunch. But then Paul said, "How much does it cost you per servant per meal?" And I said, "Paul, I haven't the foggiest notion." And he sent me the Sutton household books. Everything was noted down, what every meal of everybody ate and what they cost. There were different classifications of guests, got fed according to what he thought they were worth. I mean, there was somebody who was worth a £5 a meal, and there were people who were worth a £10 a meal, and so forth and so on.
But even at the same time that Getty was carefully tracking exactly how much each guest at dinner cost him, he liked to indulge a little too.
Yeah, I mean, the man had exotic pets.
J. Paul Getty had pet lions on the grounds at Sutton Place. And one of his most beloved lions was named Teresa. And when Teresa gave birth, Aileen was accorded a special treat. The cubs would be brought up to her room one by one.
Okay, Teresa.
Getty seems to have inspired many of today's ultra-rich. And he himself was so awed by conquerors like Julius Caesar and Napoleon that he even built a replica of an ancient Roman villa near Malibu, California. And he never even visited. Actually, Ollie, we have both been there. It's a stunning location, but in my opinion, it's kind of gaudy.
Yeah, I thought it was really cheesy. It's a nice view, though.
Yeah, it is. And Getty was a prolific art collector. At the time of his death, his collection included works by Renoir, Degas, and Monet. It was over 600 pieces and valued at more than $4 million.
And the upside to all these expensive artworks? Tax benefits.
Yep. A huge chunk of the Getty fortune was already in a family trust that would keep taxes low for his heirs. But Getty still had almost $2 billion before he died. So his parting act in 1976 was to donate most of that money to the J. Paul Getty Museum Trust. And because it's a charitable trust, it wasn't taxed. It's all gone on to the Getty Center and Getty Villa Museums in Los Angeles. And since then, the trust value has grown. The Getty Trust is the richest art institution in the world, even today.
And another perk of giving your money away to a charitable trust in your name? Image cleanup.
When the average person in Los Angeles hears the name Getty, do they think of art or do they think of oil?
I very much think they think of art.
This is Amy Woodson Bolton, the art history professor we spoke with in the last episode. She had some interesting things to say about the connection between ultra-wealthy industry titans like Getty and art. And she's lived in LA for years.
So there's a long history of the kind of massive exploitation and the wealth that that kind of exploitation creates, and then going on to fund public institutions. And the way to achieve what theorists like to call cultural capital, like how do you seem like a good person and contributing to society, a kind of like reputation laundering. Well, one of the best ways to do that is to establish art institutions, and that's been true for a very long time.
When we get back, we learn about the Getty who's taking her dynasty's connection between oil and art to an entirely new place.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
So, something that is fascinating about this story is how it bridges the past and the present. You have this powerful family dynasty that's been quietly exerting huge influence for the last 100 years, but they're steeped in mystery and lore.
That's probably because most of the living Gettys avoid the press at all costs.
Which, for James Reginato, probably made writing a Getty biography pretty challenging.
They're an incredibly private family. I mean, even though a lot of them are surrounded by the notoriety or, some have been touched by scandal. Obviously, everyone knows about, the kidnapping episode. But in the main, it was really difficult convincing any of them to speak to me.
Can I ask who talked to you?
To be careful, because some of them actually spoke to me, not for attribution.
Yeah. As we've learned firsthand, it's basically impossible to get access to the Gettys as journalists.
I know. I've tried to get really creative and DMing some of the younger Gettys on Instagram.
Yeah, I mean, these people are so wealthy. They're shielded. That makes me wonder, do you think we're actually going to get to talk to Aileen?
I don't know. We've heard from a few people in her orbit at this point that she knows we're doing this story, but is she willing to talk? I think it's pretty unclear.
Yeah, TBD. But some of the Gettys have opened up before, like in that documentary, The Tragedy of Riches. It features the family and their inner circle, including Aileen.
It's honestly shocking that so many of them agreed to do it.
And Aileen is candid in her interviews.
If there are large amounts of money, there is usually an enormous amount of distrust. And I find that very difficult to live with distrust within the family. I think it's a very painful thing to grow up with.
The fortune affected Aileen's mental health from an early age. And to warn you, what she's about to say here is upsetting.
At the age of 11, I had made a very concrete decision that I didn't want to benefit from the money. I was so frightened. I knew that at 18, you're an adult. And so I thought that that's when there would be money. So I promised that I would kill myself when I was 18.
It's really sad. Wow.
Yeah, that tape is hard to watch. In general, Aileen has not had the best experience with the press in the past, especially if you look at some of the more painful periods of her life and how they were covered.
Like when the press found out she had contracted HIV.
She did really have a serious, drug addiction issue. And then she contracted HIV, in the mid-'80s. And, that was a time when contracting HIV was basically a death sentence.
Yeah. Aileen was married at the time to a different kind of royalty, Christopher Wilding, Elizabeth Taylor's son. And she was going through a lot. Miscarriages, depression, increasing drug use. In 1989, she and Wilding divorced, and Aileen lost custody of her kids for a while.
And she really, you could say, just almost hit rock bottom. In fact, in my research, I came across a headline from USA Today, I believe it was 1991, and it was basically said that, J. Paul Getty's granddaughter, Elizabeth Taylor's, daughter-in-law, told she has 6 months to live by doctors.
Wow.
To have that publicly.
Yeah, I mean, literally to open up a newspaper and see a headline that said, you have 6 months to live. So that was 1991.
Finding out, that's an arresting feeling. At that point, I felt as though I were in the most frightening coma.
This was, in many ways, a turning point for Aileen. She went public about her struggle with addiction and her HIV status. She set up her own foundation and she started to focus on progressive causes, especially the homeless community in Los Angeles.
Aileen went from being known as an oil heiress to a philanthropist, and in 2019, she zeroed in on climate change.
Despite being a part of the Getty oil family, Aileen had long seen herself as an environmentalist. So, along with a couple of others, including another member of American royalty, filmmaker Rory Kennedy, yes, those Kennedys, she co-founded the Climate Emergency Fund.
This fund was doing things a little differently. It supported climate groups focusing on civil disobedience.
And in the UK, one of those groups, Just Stop Oil, would start planning a crazy stunt to get maximum coverage.
Remember Phoebe Plummer, Anna Holland, and The Soup?
Security!
It worked. People were outraged.
And some scrutinized the group's connection to Aileen, like the Daily Mail, which seems pretty obsessed with Just Stop Oil based on how aggressively it covers them. It ran with it and described Aileen as a foreign millionaire, bankrolling an eco-mob and disrupting the lives of hardworking Britons.
And mainstream outlets noticed the irony, too.
The press, the New York Times, wrote kind of a snide headline about, oil heiress. And, the truth is that's not sincere.
This is Adam McKay, an Oscar-winning writer and director. He's not the heir to a dynastic fortune, but he is known for hits like The Big Short and Succession, which kind of makes him a chronicler of uber-rich dynasties.
And he's been trying to make a difference in his own way.
He's on the board of the Climate Emergency Fund, and to date, he and his wife have given millions to disruptive action groups.
And here's where we should say we interviewed Adam McKay in September of 2023. He and his studio Yellow Dot came on board the show as executive producers the following year.
So there was just a moment where I realized the time frame with climate breakdown, and I realized, we're in single-digit years. That window for human intervention is narrowing fast. And I talked to my wife, and we both agreed, let's go all in. Not because we're such great people, but because we are frightened and terrified. And we realized we needed to, in any way possible, help amplify the voices of these activists.
So what did Adam think of a scion from a famous family like the Gettys funding so-called radical climate protesters?
Some people find that surprising. Can I ask how you felt about that?
I had zero problem with it. I think it's exactly how a person should behave with that kind of money being given to them at birth. And I think if all the children of all this kind of wealth, whether it's from creepy banking, oil, exploiting workers, polluting rivers. You didn't make this horrible choice, but you can still make a difference. I think these children of great fortunes have a decision to make with how they live their lives.
Adam is convinced that what he and Aileen are doing is necessary.
The people involved in Climate Emergency Fund are the people that have really made a choice with their life as opposed to just following the incentives blindly. They're really remarkable people. Aileen is a great person with a tremendous moral compass.
But there are a lot of theories about why Aileen Getty specifically would be funding these activists. Even conspiracies about her being a shill for the oil industry.
Also, Aileen is not in the oil business anymore. She and the rest of the Gettys sold Getty Oil for $10 billion to Texaco in the mid-'80s. At the time, it was the largest corporate acquisition in U.S. history.
Still, what exactly is motivating someone like Aileen to do this? We asked James Reginato if it's something he thought about when researching his book.
I mean, everyone loves to sort of draw that conclusion that, it's sort of somehow she's paying for her grandfather's sins or, she's just said, sure, she understands the idea of restitution, but, she also talks about how she just wants to do what's right. And, I'm saying, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. I mean, the fortune was made through fossil fuels.
It turns out he had tried to ask Aileen about all of this, and she wrote back.
After my book came out, she did write to me, and we did communicate.
Now, this is the part of our conversation where Reginato seemed to be a little uncomfortable. Whether that's because he didn't want to appear to speak for Aileen, or maybe he was nervous to upset a member of the family, I don't know.
He did read us some of what she wrote to him, that he later included in his books afterward, though.
She said, she wrote me, she said, I found that the same ills that are at the root of an unlivable planet are the cause of my addictions. The inability to connect deeply and honestly with myself and others, including Mother Earth. Addiction represented my smallness, the terror with which I anticipated each moment, my inability to successfully integrate into society, my very poor education and lack of preparation. I realize now that my coping mechanisms were primitive. The mechanisms driving that narrative are not built to create fulfillment.
It seems like there's the stronger parallel here. I don't want to jump to conclusions too much, but is the role addiction played in her life.
Yeah,
maybe
sure.
That closer to, our addiction to oil and gas.
That is something that one of the groups funded with her money talks about.
Yeah.
That's why they're doing all those powerful actions and demanding the end of fossil fuel extraction.
And while CEF funds Just Stop Oil, we should point out that Aileen didn't know Phoebe and Anna were going to throw the soup that day in London.
Not that she distanced herself from it. If anything, she did the opposite. In the days that followed the incident with the Van Gogh painting, Aileen doubled down in a defiant op-ed published in The Guardian.
There's a line in it that says, I am the daughter of a famous family who built their fortune on fossil fuels.
Mm-hmm.
But we now know that the extraction and use of fossil fuels is killing life on our planet.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like it's sort of a direct correlation there that she's making.
And at the end of the day, she said, we all simply have to do what's right. She said, there's legacy, and then there's personal responsibility.
There's legacy, and then there's personal responsibility.
And in a way, Aileen is creating her own legacy with the Climate Emergency Fund. It's sort of fascinating how she's weaving that thread herself between her own past, her struggles with addiction, and our addiction to oil and gas. Sam, what do you think her grandfather, oil tycoon J. Paul Getty, would think of what she's doing?
I don't think he'd like it. But I can't read his mind.
You said that your grandfather, J. Paul Getty, were he alive, would be very proud of you. Tell why.
I think so because I think I make the most of what I have, and that's all anybody can do.
I guess there's no way to know.
Yeah, but it's clear. Aileen isn't afraid to take bold actions, like funding these protests that really shock people.
How much do you think all of this is really about guilt? Like, how big a role does guilt play in all of this?
Oh, a lot. So much so that we are going to have to do a whole episode about guilt.
Right, because Aileen isn't alone. She's part of a much bigger trend.
Hey, don't give away the whole season just yet.
Okay.
For now, here's what we can say. Aileen is funding people going to dramatic lengths to stop new drilling for oil and gas.
The very same people who believe that oil executives, like Aileen's grandfather, are directly responsible for the climate crisis.
I'm going to make my high school English teacher proud and say, there is some poetic irony in that.
I hope they're listening.
Okay. We spent a lot of time in the past for this episode, but on the next episode of Sabotage, we're rooting in the present to bring you a different kind of story. We'll meet two of the smartest people on Earth who decided that it was dumb to keep following the rules. Sabotage is an original production from Good Luck Media. The show is hosted, reported, and executive produced by Alessandra Ram and me, Samantha Oltman. Our producer is Hannah Chinn. Our consulting senior producer is Rebecca Sananes. Our audio engineer is Erick Gomez, with original music by Daniel G. Harmon. With executive producers Adam McKay and Stacey Roberts Steele, produced in partnership with Yellow Dot Studios. Sabotage is represented by Drew Wellborn from WME and Andrew Randoni from Bala in Los Angeles. Our show art is designed by Luisa Betancourt. James Reginato's book is called Growing Up Getty, The Story of America's Most Unconventional Dynasty. We'll link to it in the show notes. Special thanks to Nick Carden of Carden Audio. Good Luck Media is an independent journalism studio where climate is the main character. We'll see you next week.